At 3:47 in the morning, the English Channel was dark and the coast of France was quiet. Then the first shots were fired. Within minutes, a naval engagement in the outer darkness had already begun to unravel one of the most carefully laid plans in the short, violent history of Allied combined operations. By dawn, the beaches below the chalk cliffs of Dieppe would be littered with the evidence of what courage alone cannot accomplish. But before the main assault had even touched the shore, smaller groups of men, British commandos, trained to move in darkness and to strike without warning, were already making their way toward the enemy's guns. This is their story. To understand what the Commandos were asked to do at Dieppe on the 19th of August, 1942, it is necessary to understand what they were and how they had come to be. The idea of a dedicated raiding force, trained for amphibious assault, was born in the earliest and most desperate days of the war, when Britain stood largely alone and the means of striking back at the German-occupied continent were few and imperfect. The Commandos were that means. They were the instrument of a strategy that could not yet afford armies or invasions, but refused to remain entirely passive. Their first operation came in the night of the 14th and 15th of July, 1940, barely a month after Dunkirk, barely a month after France had fallen. A small party went ashore on Guernsey in the Channel Islands, already under German occupation. It was, in the honest accounting of history, a modest affair. Cautious, incomplete, more a proof of concept than a demonstration of power. But it was a beginning. The Commandos had touched enemy-held ground. They had gone out across the water in darkness and returned. And in the particular mathematics of that summer, when Britain's choices were as narrow as they had ever been, even that counted for something. Through the remaining years of 1940 and into 1941, the raids multiplied and grew more ambitious. Operations in Norway, on the Lofoten Islands, produced not only military results but moments of human texture that lodge in the memory. During the Lofoten raid, a soldier emerged from a building half wild with excitement, dragging a captive behind him. "I got a bleeding general," he shouted, though what he had in fact captured was a local collaborator, a quisling rather than an officer of the Wehrmacht. It was the kind of moment that in another context might seem comic. In that context, the early, grim years of the war when victories of any kind were rare, it carried a different weight entirely. It was the sound of men who had not stopped believing that the war could be fought and, eventually, won. In November of 1941 came an operation of a different and darker character. Lieutenant Colonel Keyes led a raid against what was believed to be the headquarters of General Erwin Rommel in North Africa, a strike intended to remove one of Germany's most dangerous commanders at a single blow. The raiders got through. They reached the building. But, as Hilary St. George Saunders records in the official account, the enemy had been taken by surprise, but most unfortunately, General Rommel himself was absent. Keyes was mortally wounded in the assault. He was awarded the Victoria Cross. The medal was posthumous. It is worth pausing on that word, posthumous. In the accounting of commando operations in those years, it appears with a frequency that should give us pause, a reminder that the courage being celebrated and the loss being mourned are, in these cases, the same event seen from two different angles. Then came Saint Nazaire on the 28th of March, 1942. It was, by any measure, one of the most audacious operations of the entire war. The old destroyer HMS Campbelltown, laden with delayed action explosives and disguised to resemble a German vessel, was driven at full speed toward the great lock gates of the dry dock at Saint-Nazaire, the only dock on the Atlantic coast capable of receiving the German battleship Tirpitz. Lieutenant Commander S.H. Beatty of the Royal Navy commanded the ship. He held her on course through a fire that grew more intense with every passing minute. At 1:34 in the morning, the Campbelltown struck the lock gates. Lieutenant Curtis, who was present, remembered it afterward. "A hell of a crash," he said, delivered under the glare of a disturbed enemy. Hours later, The explosives detonated. The dock was destroyed. It would not be repaired for the remainder of the war. Saint Nazaire demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt what commando forces could achieve when planning, determination, and a measure of fortune all aligned. It also demonstrated, with equal clarity, the cost. Many of those who went in did not come back. The dock was wrecked. The price was paid. By the summer of 1942, the war had shifted and deepened. America had entered. The pressure for a second front, a direct assault on German-occupied Europe, was growing from every direction, from the Soviet Union, bearing the weight of the Eastern Front, from public opinion in Britain and America, from the logic of the strategic situation itself. A full invasion was not yet possible. The means, the doctrine, the hard-won knowledge of how to put armies ashore against a defended coast, none of it was sufficiently developed. What was needed, it was decided, was a large-scale raid, something that would test the defenses, probe the practicalities, and generate the lessons that a genuine invasion would require. The town chosen was Dieppe, on the Normandy coast of France. The plan, in its essentials, called for a frontal assault on the town itself by Canadian infantry, flanked by operations against the headlands on either side. The coastal gun batteries that could devastate the assault fleet had to be silenced before the main landings went in. That task fell to the Commandos. Number 3 Commando, under Major J.F. Durnford Slater, was assigned to destroy the Goebbels battery to the east. Number 4 Commando was assigned the Hesse battery to the west. The difference in what happened to each of these two forces illuminates with terrible precision how fine the margin is between a plan that holds and a plan that breaks apart. Number 4. Commando went in and did what they had been sent to do. Their operation, which will be treated at length in its own account, stands as one of the cleanest pieces of military execution in the entire history of combined operations. That is their story, and it is a remarkable one. Number 3. Commando's story is different. In the outer darkness of the channel, before the coast had even been reached, the small flotilla of landing craft carrying Number 3 Commando ran into a German convoy. What followed was a sharp, chaotic naval engagement, gunfire, flares, the sudden illumination of men who had depended on darkness for their survival. The element of surprise, which was everything, was gone. The flotilla was broken up. Only a small number of the landing craft were able to press on toward the shore. Captain R.G. Pettiward led one of those parties in. Lieutenant J.A. MacDonald led another. Both of these officers were killed. The men who made it ashore found themselves outnumbered and without the strength to accomplish their assigned objective. The Goebbels battery was not destroyed. As the main Canadian assault went in across the beaches of Dieppe, the guns that Number 3 Commando had been sent to silence were still in action. It is a hard fact, and it must be stated plainly. The failure to silence that battery on the eastern flank contributed directly to the difficulties and the casualties that the assault forces suffered on the beach. This is not an assignment of blame. It is an acknowledgement of how these things work, how a single element of a complex plan, disrupted by a chance encounter in the dark, can send consequences cascading through every part of the operation that follows. War is, among other things, a system of contingencies. At Dieppe, many of those contingencies fell in the worst possible direction. And yet, even in the disintegration of Number 3 Commando's operation, there were acts of courage that deserve to be recorded. Small groups of men, knowing that the broader plan had already miscarried, pressed on regardless. They could not silence the battery. They could not change the outcome. But they did not simply turn away. They went in as far as they could go, and some of them did not come back. The nature of what they attempted is worth holding in the mind, to close with an enemy position at night against forces that have now been alerted with a fraction of the strength originally intended, knowing that success is almost certainly no longer possible. To do that requires a particular quality, not recklessness, but something more deliberate and more costly than recklessness. It requires a decision, made in full awareness. The main Dieppe assault, meanwhile, had met the coast. The Canadian regiments, the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, the Essex Scottish, the South Saskatchewan Regiment, the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, the Fusiliers Mont Royal, the Royal Regiment of Canada, and the Calgary Tanks, were going in across the gravel beaches below the white cliffs and the guns of the German defenders. What happened to them has been told in earlier chapters of this series. The machine gun fire from the headlands, the wire and obstacles on the beaches, the tanks that could not get off the shingle, the terrible arithmetic of men exposed on an open shore against prepared positions. But alongside the Canadians, and woven into the texture of that terrible morning, were other acts and other figures. The Royal Marines were committed to the battle. And here the account pauses on a sentence from the official record, a sentence that contains, compressed within it, the whole weight of what was being asked. As Saunders writes, "With a courage terrible to see, the Marines went in to land determined, if fortune so willed, to repeat at Dieppe what their fathers had accomplished at Zeebrugge." The fathers at Zeebrugge, the sons at Dieppe. Courage passed down across a generation, from one hard shore to another. The parallel was not merely rhetorical. It expressed something real about the nature of the institution and the men who served in it, the sense that they were part of a long line of those who had gone in across defended water, and that this morning was their place in that line. Fortune, on this morning, did not so will it. The Marines suffered heavily, but the courage that went in with them was genuine, and the record of it is genuine, and it should be stated without qualification. There is a remark preserved from those days, a piece of black English humor that circulated among those who lived under the Blitz and the war's daily weight. Do you remember what the old lady said in the middle of a Blitz? There is something to be said for these bombs. They do take your mind off the war. It is the kind of remark that only makes sense to people living inside a particular kind of sustained extremity. The joke that is also, at some level, a coping mechanism, a way of maintaining the self against conditions that would otherwise overwhelm it. The Commandos, the Marines, the Canadians on the beach at Dieppe, these were people living inside that extremity. The humor, where it existed, was part of how they endured it. By the time the order to withdraw was given, and by the time, in many cases, withdrawal was no longer possible, the cost of the day was already catastrophic. Of the nearly 5,000 Canadians who embarked for Dieppe, fewer than half returned to England. More than 900 were killed. Close to 2,000 were taken prisoner. The figures, recited plainly, carry a weight that commentary can only diminish. The commando operations had been integral to the plan. Where they succeeded, as with No. 4 Commando and the Hesse Battery, they succeeded completely. Where they failed, as with No. 3 Commando on the eastern flank, the failure carried consequences that extended far beyond the commandos themselves. This is the nature of combined operations, the interdependency that is also a form of vulnerability. What one force cannot do, another force may have to pay for. In the aftermath, in the days and weeks that followed, as the casualty lists were compiled and the reports were written and the lessons were methodically extracted from the wreckage of the operation, a great deal of what Dieppe had demonstrated began to be understood. The necessity of heavy naval and air support before troops go ashore. The problem of attacking a fortified port directly. The importance of specialized armored vehicles capable of operating on difficult terrain. The requirement for more precise and more reliable communications between the elements of a combined assault. These were not trivial lessons. They were, in the most direct possible sense, the lessons that shaped the planning for Normandy, for the invasion that came nearly 2 years later and that, when it came, went differently. It is not comfortable to say that the dead at Dieppe contributed to the success at Normandy. It reduces men to instruments. But it is also true, in the plainest operational sense, that what was learned on those beaches in August of 1942 was applied on those other beaches in June of 1944. The knowledge was paid for. It was also used. The Commandos who went in on the night of the 18th and the early morning of the 19th of August were part of a force that was, in 1942, still finding its form, still working out, through trial and through suffering, what combined amphibious operations at scale required. Major Durnford Slater's No. 3 Commando, scattered by a chance encounter in the dark, represented the fragility of even the best-laid plans when exposed to the frictions of actual combat. Captain Pettiward and Lieutenant MacDonald, both killed in the attempt to press on despite everything, represented the human dimension of that fragility. Not abstractions, but men with names who made decisions and acted on them and did not return. There is something in the Commando story at Dieppe that resists easy narrative. It is not a story of triumph. It is not quite a story of failure either, at least not of the kind that dishonors those who were part of it. It is a story of what happens when the plans of careful men encounter the disorder of actual war. When a convoy appears in the dark where no convoy was expected, and the element of surprise on which everything depends is stripped away in minutes, and the men who remain must decide quickly and without adequate information what to do next. What they did was press forward. Not because success was still possible, it was not, but because the mission had been given to them, and because the men beside them were going in, and because retreat in that moment was not a choice they were prepared to make. That is not a small thing. It does not redeem the losses or resolve the tragedy. But it is true, and it belongs in the record. The Dieppe raid has sometimes been described in the decades since as a necessary sacrifice, as though the men who died there understood that they were paying forward a cost that others would benefit from. They did not understand that, because they could not have understood it. They went in because they had been ordered to, and because they believed in what they were doing, and because the men beside them were going. The lessons came afterward, in the reports and the analyses and the planning sessions that followed the disaster. The men on the beach did not die for lessons. They died on a specific morning, on a specific shore, in a specific configuration of fire and obstacle and bad fortune that converged on them out of the dark. What we owe them is not a narrative of redemption. What we owe them is accuracy, the honest account of what happened, what they faced, and what they did. That is a harder form of respect than the ceremonial kind, and it is the more durable one. The English Channel is still there. The chalk cliffs above Dieppe are still there. The beaches are, in peacetime, quiet places, stones underfoot, the sound of water, the particular emptiness of ground that has absorbed something that the ground itself does not record. Those who visit sometimes stand and look and try to imagine what the morning of August the 19th, 1942 looked and sounded and felt like. They cannot, quite. None of us can. The gap between the imagination and the experience is too wide, and it is right that it should be. What remains, what the records and the memoirs and the official accounts and the names on the memorials give us, is partial, and partial is what we have. The Commandos who went in with No. 3 Commando that morning, who came out of the dark into gunfire, who tried to carry a plan forward after the plan had already broken, who went in knowing the odds had turned against them, are part of a larger story that Canada tells about itself when it chooses to tell the truth. Not the story of easy victory, not the story of wars that go as planned. The story of what ordinary men do when they are placed in extraordinary circumstances, and the circumstances are not kind. That story deserves to be told straight, in full, without embellishment and without evasion. Here, on these shores, at this cost, with this result, and with this courage, which was real, and which was not enough, and which mattered anyway. The history of Canada is much larger than any single video. Every expedition, battle, rebellion, and discovery belongs to a much greater story. And we have created a course that brings that story together. Across 41 illustrated video lessons, you can follow Canadian history from ancient migrations and the First Nations through New France, the fur trade, the War of 1812, Confederation, the Riel Rebellions and the settlement of Western Canada. Instead of presenting history as a collection of disconnected names and dates, the course shows how each chapter shaped the events that followed. You can try it before deciding whether to enroll. Simply visit CanadianHistoryCourse.ca. Choose any lesson that interests you and watch it completely free. You do not need to enter any credit card information. Visit CanadianHistoryCourse.ca and choose your first lesson today.